Let's get started. So welcome everybody to the launch event for BGV's 2021 Impact and Learning Reports event. So for those of you who don't know us, we're Bethnal Green Ventures, also known as BGV. We are Europe's leading early stage tech for good VC. And we invest in ambitious and diverse founders using technology to create positive impact at scale. We're a team of 11 people, and we're all brought together by a shared belief that tech for good can help to solve some of our biggest social and environmental issues that we're facing. Whether that's the climate crisis, inequality, there's definitely no shortage of them. And while it can be easy, both personally and professionally, sometimes to be overwhelmed by the doom and gloom that we seem to be constantly surrounded by. We try and channel F. Scott Fitzgerald, who said that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless, yet be determined to make them otherwise. And we are indeed determined to create a different, more hopeful future. So today, we'll be covering four main areas that we brought to life in our impact report. So you'll obviously be hearing from me, and yeah, now's probably a good time to introduce myself. I am Millie. I'm part of the team at Bethnal Green Ventures. I lead on our brand and communications. You'll also be hearing from Paul, who is our CEO and managing partner, and also Dharma, who leads on our networks and communities. So we'll be diving into reflections on 10 years of BGV, because this year is our 10-year anniversary. Seems to be the same for quite a few other organizations in the ecosystem. So something was in the water in 2012, we think. And then we'll be diving into how we're changing startup investing. So Dharma will be taking you through that. We'll then be looking at whether mission drift is a thing. So this is a new analysis that we've done, and we'll be exploring impact at scale. And then finally, we'll be looking at a new approach that we've taken to diversity and inclusion this year. And if we have time at the end, we will happily open it up to Q&A. So if you have any questions as we're going along, do pop them in the chat. Our colleague Yumi should also be here, who we should give a big shout out to, because she leads on our data collection, our insights and our analysis. So lots of this report and lots of these insights are down to Yumi. So she can definitely answer any more sort of technical questions on our methodology and our approach. So we certified as a B Corp in 2015. We believe the first UK VC to do so. And of course, part of that is about putting out an impact report and being really transparent about your impact, both as an organization and also for us really important, because it's not just our impact as an organization, but also like that is our business. And as you can see here, our impact reports have certainly grown in both depth and breadth, and hopefully design over the years. And this year's is certainly our biggest and boldest yet. We actually started working on this in November last year, believe it or not, and we're already starting to think about ideas for next year. Maybe we'll give ourselves a break for a week or two. But yeah, we start early because of the amount of data that we need to collect. And for us, our impact reports provide a really helpful kind of focus point for us in terms of course, we'd already be collecting and analyzing all of this data, because we genuinely believe in always improving, always trying to be better. But our impact reports were a really lovely way for us to kind of bring all of that together and to share it with the world. And this year's impact report is particularly special for us because, as I said, it's our 10-year anniversary, so it reflects on those 10 years. And before we explore that story and before I pass over to Paul, I thought I'd just run through a couple of highlights from this year. So it was certainly a busy year, and as I said, we certified as B Corp in 2015, but those of you that are also B Corps will know that that requires a recertification every 3 years. And this year we recertified, increasing our score by 20 points, which we were very proud of. We were also named VC of the Year by Environmental Finance's Impact Awards. We were ranked second globally for our diversity and inclusion efforts, and that was by the Equality Group's PE and VC D&I index. And of course, we were also joining forces with Connected Asset Management, and Connected are a pioneering new asset management firm that's trying to bring impact to the world of pensions. And we're very excited at the prospect of accessing that 3 trillion UK opportunity and funneling some of that into tech for good. We ended the year with a healthy portfolio valuation on our first fund, which is 2.1x of realized and unrealized value. And we made 31 investments. So our investment team were very busy behind the scenes. And of course, we're very proud of our portfolio's progress this year. So they were positively impacting the lives of 13 million people. We're hoping to increase that to 100 million in the next 10 years, if not sooner. They generated revenues in 2021 alone of 54 million. We were very happy to see another portfolio exit as Salve was acquired, and 16 of our teams raised follow-on funding. And there you can see an overview as well of how our portfolio is split by theme, which we analyze every year. And yeah, here are some of our faces, some of the faces of our portfolio. So in the middle is Otto and Sirona. We were very excited as they were selected to join the prestigious YC Y Combinator Winter 2022 cohort. Lavender on the top right raised a 1.5 million round to address inequalities within the sexual health system. And there were many other successes, such as Fairphone launching their Fairphone 4 to rave reviews. So if you haven't got a Fairphone, go get one. So with that, I think it's time for us to hand over to Paul and to reflect on both what the state of tech for good was in 2012. Let me tell you, it was very different. I wasn't there, but Paul was. So we're going to hand over to him to take us through our journey over those 10 years and what we've learned along the way.
Thanks very much, Millie. Yeah, as Millie says, 2012, there must have been something in the air. I'm not sure what it was. There's all kinds of interesting developments that we now know have led to the growth of impact investing and tech for good 10 years on. But at the time, it felt like it was incredibly new and that it was a very small world, as it were. The thing that that coloured that first few investments that we made in summer 2012 was the London Olympics. We actually struggled to house the founders of the startups who come from all over Europe for that first cohort, and in the end we ended up having to rent them a house so as they could all live together, which we don't do anymore. But that really, I think shaped that idea of how do you build a community of startup founders that we continue to use that principle today. So I thought I'd just give you 10 things that we've learned over the last 10 years, 10 things that really feed into our strategy as Bethnal Green Ventures. And I hope things that show a little bit about us as a company, us as an investor, but also potentially things that other organizations can learn from as well. So the first is that we set out really to try and understand the system that we were trying to change. Our mission at BGV, as Dharma is going to talk about a little bit later on, is to make tech for good investing the norm. We think it should be the standard in the venture capital world, in the tech investing world. And to do that, we really needed to understand that system that we were trying to change. And that meant really getting underneath the hood of the venture capital industry, of the tech industry. Not everything we found was positive, I have to admit, but there was so much energy on the side of the founders who were trying to access that it really gave us confidence that there was an opportunity to provide a new kind of funding, a new kind of investment for tech for good founders. But in order to do that, we started off by trying to understand that system, understand the problem we were trying to face. The second lesson that we learned over the last 10 years is that certainly the transparency that we've tried to project has earned trust for us. So one of the things we learned when we were trying to understand the system was actually transparency in venture capital isn't the norm at all. It's actually quite hard to find out anything about the venture capital industry and about particular firms, to the extent that it used to be that certainly some firms deliberately went under the radar in order to kind of keep what they were doing a little bit secret, keep it elite, keep it hidden away. We haven't done that. We've definitely tried to be as open as possible about all of our data, about what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve. And I think that's something that we've learned has been a real positive over the last 10 years, is to try and open up and be as transparent as we possibly can. The third lesson we've learned is that it's fine to be different. Actually, we take pride in being a little bit different as BGV and looking at different things compared to other venture capital firms. I think it's served us really well. It's meant that we've been able to look at potential businesses that others overlooked because we had a different view as to what markets, what problems it was important to try and solve, and which could create big businesses. And that has been a big part of our strategy, is to look for things that potentially other people aren't looking for. And again, I think that's been something that's helped us to grow as BGV. The fourth lesson is, again, something we learned from trying to understand the system, is that by making complicated things simple, we can really provide value. The venture capital industry, the tech industry, no shortage of jargon, no shortage of concepts, no shortage of ways of doing things that are really opaque and complicated, sometimes deliberately, I think, in order to kind of create a barrier to entry for some people. And so by having a principle of just trying to make the complicated things simple, that's certainly served us well. So we do try to avoid jargon. If you find some jargon on our website, in the impact report, please do tell us. We try to explain it whenever we can, and try to certainly educate before we negotiate when it comes to legals and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, making the complicated simple is something that's served us well over the last 10 years. The fifth lesson is talk is cheap. Actually, there's no point really just saying things or saying you're going to do things without actually really doing them. And that's something that we've seen. I think there's a lot of talk about impact, certainly about ESG in the venture capital world. I think what we've tried to do is make sure that we're not just talking about it, that we are actually doing it. And I think people notice that. Certainly founders notice it. If there is, if we put our money where our mouth is, if you like, then we can actually show that we are practically doing things rather than just talking about these issues. The sixth lesson is don't wait for others. I think when we started out in 2012, certainly it felt like a lonely business, to be honest. There weren't any other tech for good VCs really, certainly not at the stage that we were investing at that super early stage. But we didn't stick around for others to join, and we also started with a very, very small amount of money to invest, and then grew that over time rather than waiting to raise a big fund before we started investing. So I think that has also served us well. Don't wait around, just get on with it. The seventh lesson is one that we talk about a lot, which is that the sum is greater than the parts, that the community, the ecosystem is super important to us as part of our strategy at Bethnal Green Ventures. So the community that we built up of portfolio companies, of mentors, of partners, of other players in the ecosystem has been really valuable to us in all kinds of ways that sometimes that aren't obvious. But that idea of making sure that we are focusing on the whole has been a really important lesson to us, and not just heads down thinking about BGV, only thinking about BGV, but thinking about the whole system, the whole community. That's been a really important part of what has made BGV what it is today. The eighth lesson, I think, is related to that, and again back to our understand the problem, understand the system that you're working in, is that we've tried to recognize and correct where we can power imbalances in the system. So there's no doubt that being an investor in the startup ecosystem gives you a form of power. There is a relationship there with founders that you have to be very careful of. You have to understand that we can potentially change people's lives through investing or through helping one firm over another. And that power we don't take lightly. We take it very, very seriously. And I think when we've seen other people in the ecosystem not use that in a way that we think is ethical, we have tried to call it out. We don't do that necessarily publicly. We do it often behind the scenes and try and help people to see where there's bad behavior and try and address it. But I think that has again served us well and served to improve our reputation and to help founders see that it is more of an equal relationship, hopefully, with BGV than it is potentially with some investors. So that's something we've learned over the years. Ninth related is, I think, leave the ego at the door. There are definitely a lot of egos in the tech world, in the venture capital world. We've tried not to be one of those. We've tried to actually embrace competitors and sort of try and share what we've learned, because our aim as BGV is to build tech for good to be the norm, as I say, in tech investing. So actually, from our point of view, it's great to see more people joining tech for good, more people doing impact venture capital. We think that is great. We think that is essentially helping us to achieve our mission of making tech for good mainstream. And finally, I think if you're signed up to our investor newsletter, you may recognize the phrase, but stay practical, stay optimistic. In some ways, it's you see a lot of failure as a venture investor. You see lots of things that don't work out, lots of things that don't go right. And as Millie says, some of the problems that we're trying to address, some of the big social, environmental challenges, it's a world that's filled with doom and gloom if you look at it in one way. But I think whenever we open up for applications, as we have at the moment, we can't help but actually be quite optimistic, because you see this flood of ideas, flood of energy from founders who want to solve these problems. So staying optimistic on one level is easier for us, because we see all these amazing people coming through the door who've got ideas to try and solve problems. But again, that optimism has to be practical. It has to actually be something that can have an impact, can have a measurable impact, not just an idea, not just a theoretical construct around how we should solve these problems, but something that can be used to practically do something about it. So that's our final lesson: stay practical, stay optimistic. And if we keep on doing that, then hopefully tech for good will become the norm, and we will see some of these great big challenges that we need to address as the human race solved within our lifetimes. So there we go, 10 lessons from 10 years, back in the days of July 2012, when we started making those investments, and the London Olympics, through to now, in a very different world, I think, but one that we're excited to keep on investing in and keep on looking for founders, helping those founders, and build brilliant tech for good businesses. So I'll leave it there, and I will hand over to Dharma, who's going to talk a little bit more about that system change element of what we're trying to do at BGV.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. And hello, everyone. For those ones who don't know me, I'm Dharma. My pronouns are she, her. And we're just going to spend a couple of minutes just going through some of the work that we do in order to ensure we are actually creating an enabling environment for founders, for tech for good founders, particularly, to thrive. We have this one slide that we're going to show you in how we're actually changing the startup investing ecosystem and hopefully ensure that we are creating this enabling environment for everyone to thrive. Certainly, we're not doing this work alone, and this work in particular is really a framework that we have developed together with Big Society Capital, which is the UK's leading financial institution dedicated to social impact investment in the UK, and also one of our LPs. For anyone unfamiliar with the concept of systems practice, it actually provides you with a method to really push beyond what we perceive to be the immediate problems and recognize the underlying patterns, and therefore also explore the ways in which we might leverage the system and how we can learn and adapt as the system continues to change. If you're looking to further educate yourself on systems practice, Media Network have an amazing resource on this whole topic as well. But within the venture capitalist world, we see a range of challenges, from the lack of access to capital for founders, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds, to the lack of VC funding for tech for good businesses, period. A systems practice approach then in turn actually allows us to work around some of the complexities of these issues and to work towards a healthy VC and tech for good ecosystem that ensures that we actually provide access to capital to founders from all walks of life. So ultimately, what we want to ensure at BGV is that the investments we make today, be they financial or otherwise, have a material effect on the positive outcomes we want to see for people and planet. So next slide. If we have a look at the systems practice approaches within BGV, they're centered around 5 particular pillars. The first pillar being resource flow. And that basically means that we do our utmost to create really strong deal flow for tech for good ventures. And that also means that we publicly try to advocate with other investors and infrastructure providers to really support tech for good ventures. What that looked like in the past year, we merged with Connected to also unlock the, as Millie said, the potential 3 trillion pension market to seed tech for good investments and to really look into how we can use stewards of long-term capital to look into venture investing as well. We continued plugging the mid-stage capital gap for our existing portfolios by providing follow-on investments. And you've seen that more and more teams are actually receiving investment, not just from impact investors, but also from more traditional investors who are increasingly looking to put their money where their mouth is, which is really great to see. And another thing that we've done as part of the resource flow structure is really become one of the founding members of the UK Tech for Good network, which is all about banging the drum for more tech for good across the UK as well. It's a great network of different organizations across the UK with Tech for Good Life. We also have an amazing podcast with Tech for Good Southwest and other regional partners in order to ensure that we're not only focused on London as a hub for Tech for Good, but are also looking outside of London to ensure that we are equitable and providing access to capital to people from all regions. In terms of policy, our aim there is to really create a better policy environment that ensures that tech for good ventures can emerge and have the right access to capital, research and development, but also advise government on regulation, policy and funding for tech for good. In 2021 specifically, we became a signatory to the Investing in Women Code, which is a league of financial services with a combined investment power of nearly £1 trillion pounds now, to really improve access and access to investment and resources for female entrepreneurs. because the stats are still bleak when it comes to access to capital for female founder teams. But we'll dive into how we're performing against that target in the next section around diversity inclusion as well. Another really important thing that we've done in the past year was really joining some of the steering groups around inclusive innovation, which is really looking into the conditions of place-based innovation across the UK and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland as well, to really see whether we can draw up a set of recommendations that ensure no one is left behind. So really looking into the entire supply chain and to the power dynamics of how innovation is actually being, inclusive innovation is being delivered and adopted by the people they are trying to serve as well. The report is due to come out fairly soon, so stay tuned for more. We also became one of the first signatories to Make My Money Matter, which is a whole national campaign to actually shifting the narrative towards investing in a better future with the money that each of us put into our pension pots as well. So really thinking about what world we actually want to retire into. Another really strong aspect of our systems approach is around relationships and connections. And that is really to provide people, even if we ourselves cannot invest into them because there's only a certain amount of capacity that we have investing into companies as well. We do want to ensure that there's a platform for tech for good founders to connect, for investors to connect, for people who are looking to career changes, to find purpose-driven work as well. And we do this through many, many events and online activities. And we're very proud to say that the Tech for Good London group we started before BGV even existed in 2008 has now grown to over 10,000 members in the UK, in London alone. And another big aspect is also ensuring that founders from all walks of life have access to BGV. So ensuring that no warm introductions are needed. So coming to Q&A sessions, we've run Q&A sessions to really level the playing field for founders to know who we are and to actually make informed decisions about whether they want us on their cap table too. These sessions have been hugely successful, and if there are founders in the group here as well and you're looking for investment from B2B, do join one of the upcoming sessions we have in the next month. The next part is really around power dynamics, and this is really understanding that we also need to shift the narrative around that we can ditch the sort of trade-off mentality, and that also links to our aspect around mental models as well. But we do this type of work by raising the profile of tech for good ventures and showing they're able to deliver superior returns. A lot of work has gone into this to also contribute to the UK BAA, Angel Investment in Diversity guidelines, that a few people who are on the call have also contributed to really encourage more access to capital to underrepresented founders as well when it comes to seeking angel investment at the very early stages. We became signatories to the Moving Forward initiative, which is hugely important in an environment where there is already a power imbalance between founders and investors. And this is just one of the bigger movements that have emerged out of the Me Too movement as well, to really ensure that founders have approaches to reporting harassment and having safe pathways for actually raising funding as well, and not feeling intimidated by the journey. It also means highlighting profiles of tech for good ventures, also means facilitating a lot of the PR and networks that happen. So a lot of effort went into actually ensuring that a lot of our portfolio ventures are also receiving the coverage in publications like Sifted, Career Magazine, and Business Insider to really showcase that you can do good and do well. And the last bit around mental models, also just to explain, a mental model is a person's understanding of how something works and how their actions affect it. And historically, we've always had a sort of trade-off mentality when it came to impact investing or generally tech for good investing as well. But what you've seen with this report and the past 10 years evidence that we have is that, again, you can do good and do well. What we do in order to encourage more people to ditch this trade-off mentality is just provide more resources and access to actually understanding how do you actually evaluate impact startups, or how do you actually go about validating and measuring your impact and managing the process forward, as well as you are at a very early stage but want to build on your impact integrity as you grow. And one of our colleagues has authored an amazing in-depth impact management guide for this, which you'll be able to access fairly soon. We ran a number of events that were attended by nearly 2,000 people, all about understanding the value of impact investing and the value of investing into tech for good startups as well. And another big piece of this is to also steward better fund practices when it comes to integrating impact and ESG across the fund level, but also into across portfolio level as well, as part of the venture ESG group. So yeah, this is just a snapshot of all the activities we've done in 2021. We definitely want to build on this and see how we can ensure that we are creating this enabling environment. So if you're interested in partnering with us on any of those activities, please do get in touch. And I'll hand over to Millie.
Amazing, thanks, Dharma. So on to the next section, which is looking at impact at scale. And as we heard from Paul, the industry has shifted dramatically in the past 10 years. And it's fair to say that people were fairly skeptical 10 years ago, as Dharma said, as to whether there was a trade-off between doing well and doing good. But we think both BGV and the wider industry has now really proven that that is a myth, and whether tech for good is viable is not actually the question that is at the top of people's minds anymore. So interestingly, as companies start maturing, as the industry starts maturing, the question has shifted more to, can these companies actually scale their impact as they grow? And it's a good question. We've certainly seen a few scandals, both sort of here and across the pond, and perhaps the most obvious one, and you've probably all read about it or listened to the podcast, is Theranos. And they were a company that arguably could have been classed as, like an impact-driven tech for good company. They were promising accessible, affordable healthcare to the masses. And as we saw, that, just completely fell apart. So we're fully aware that as this space grows, there are going to be more, more scandals like that. But part of our role is to actually grow the ecosystem with integrity to really minimize that. Another example that might be slightly less obvious that comes to my mind is Airbnb. So when you hear the founders, talk when they first started it, their mission was kind of around democratizing travel and actually trying to bring people together, and, particularly in communities. But as they've grown, we've actually seen lots of unintended consequences, whether that's kind of the controversy that's been caused in local sort of cities and places around sort of driving prices up or displacing locals. I'm not trying to fire shots at Airbnb. I use it as much as everybody else, but I suppose my point here is that mission drift is a question on people's minds. And actually, what we believe is the reason as to how we can ensure that companies don't fall foul of scaling their impact is actually having that impact innate to their business model. And we only invest in companies where that is true. So that's our first kind of approach to ensuring that companies can scale their impact. And it makes up part of our investment thesis. And now that we're at 10 years, we're in a really fortunate position to be able to actually look back, and we've got companies that are old enough and mature enough now to actually analyze whether our hypothesis that indeed tech for good companies can scale their impact in direct relation to their commercial success, we can see whether that is true. So we've actually been using this framework to try and validate impact since 2017. So this is Nesta's standards of evidence. And what it does is helps you understand whether the impact that a company is having can be attributed to that company. Because that is a big question, sort of, would this impact have happened with, even without this company? Would it have been filled by another solution? And indeed, we've actually seen some very promising results. So this is a new analysis. We're sharing this analysis for the first time. And as you can see in this grid, we've got 5 levels, and they're increasing in their expectations of the standards of evidence that companies are producing to validate their impact. And the dark squares represent earlier stage companies. So they're the likes of program and pre-seed ventures. And then, as you can see, the turquoise is the ventures that have moved into a seed stage, so they're growing. And then the bright green is Series A and above. And as you can see with the progression of the colors, actually 100% of our Series A ventures are operating at a standard of evidence for their impact at level 3 or above. So that means that they can demonstrate the causality of their impact. They can replicate that impact, and they have really robust systems and procedures around that. So we thought this was pretty exciting, and there were a few other insights that came out of this as well, because you can cut this data in many ways, and indeed Yumi, who did this analysis, did. And interestingly, we also looked at it by theme, and we found that companies operating in our healthy lives theme and sustainable planet were sort of disproportionately to the right of the grid. So even if they were kind of a program or pre-seed venture, they were actually operating at a sort of a much more advanced level of their impact measurement and management. Our hypothesis for this is that there are regulatory requirements surrounding both of those industries, so both in the healthcare industry and in sustainability and climate tech. So to bring that to life, we've got an example here, which is one of our leading health tech companies, Second Nature. And they were actually the first online habit change program to be commissioned by the NHS. And anyone who's worked in the NHS or the healthcare industry will know that obviously there are, and rightly so, there are rigorous sort of processes and validation that needs to happen for something like this to be essentially recommended and prescribed to people, because there has to be evidence that it works. So they are a really great example of why tech for good companies actually have really rigorous impact measurement and management practices, and because they're solving real problems and they have to prove that they're solving those real problems. And we think this is really promising for the rest of the tech for good industry and impact-driven venture as a whole, because what we've found is that companies do indeed develop their impact practices as they grow. And so long as a company has impact innate to their business model, really important, mission drift isn't something that we have to worry about too much. And we believe, as I said, that we might be one of the first VCs to measure and share this, but we really look forward to seeing other investors' analysis of their portfolio too, because the more that we can build that picture, the further we can push tech for good. So another area that we often break ground in is our approach to diversity and inclusion. And this year was no different. So for our last section of today, I'm going to hand over to Dharma to explain how we went one step further than we did last year. So Dharma, reappear. There you are. Like a magic trick.
Ta-da! Great, thank you so much, Millie. And again, a huge shout out to Yumi, who's led on this terrific work for BGV as well. The next part is just diving a bit deeper into our portfolio diversity inclusion, but keeping and bearing in mind that we also deeply care about being transparent around our own diversity inclusion across our team, our investment committee, and wider sort of venture partners as well. So please do have a look at our report on the data that we report on our own team makeup as well, because representation matters. For this part, it's just really nice to sort of reiterate that we are incredibly big believers in Mitch Kapor's statement that basically says that genius is evenly distributed, opportunity is not. And our aim at BGV is to change that distribution of opportunity by also increasing diversity inclusion among the founders we invest in and our team. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see quite a transformation of how we measure diversity and inclusion within our portfolio. When we first started out publishing our impact report back in 2017, we had just one metric to focusing on diversity of our portfolio companies, and that was namely the proportion of women working in the companies we've backed, which was at the time 3 times the tech industry average and has sort of remained on that bar. So it wasn't bad to start out with. And then sort of with the evolution of our impact reports as well, and with more industry reports coming out, and actually paint a better picture of what the landscape of VC funding is for female founder teams, for example, and ethnic minority businesses. Rodney is here in the audience as well. They've done a terrific report with Cornerstone Partners on this topic as well. But with the sort of emergence of the Female Founders Report, I think in 2019, we then also started looking at the gender parity in our investment decisions per year. And as we all know, VC investments are notoriously unbalanced. And while we're still working to improve, we are pleased to say that our results are significantly better than the average. In 2021, for every pound invested, 40p went into mixed gender teams, 38p went into all men only teams, and 22p went into women only teams. So there's still much to do. And one of the sort of bigger things that we are now trying to do is actually show more data from our portfolio founders as well that looks into their socioeconomic background, into their ethnic backgrounds, the differences in access to capital based on intersectional data. And this is a small snapshot you see here. But if we go on to the next slide. One of the biggest sort of things that has come from this and our thinking around this as well is to ensure that we publish this data on a regular basis and that we benchmark ourselves against the population rather than an industry that is honestly really rife with inequalities. The last year, as was mentioned before, saw us become the first European VC, to our knowledge, who has actually published quite extensive data on our portfolio, covering more than just gender, looking at the socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, and so much more. And we're asked quite a couple of times on why publishing this data matters. And the answer to that is pretty simple. Representation matters. And if we want to be truly inclusive and enable more access to capital, we also need to be transparent about our efforts in doing so. If we go on to the next slide. So some of the things that we've taken away from our results that we published for the 2020 report, we then focused on a few areas where we could make marginal changes happen. And that's from designing and launching a new deal flow strategy, which really increase our networks of founders as well, who come from underrepresented groups, to providing tailored pre-investment readiness workshops for founders from marginalized communities, like the Entrepreneur Refugee Network and other sort of partners that we work with, to really helping them navigate the murky world of VC, to communicating BGV's approach to flexibility and what type of support we offer to all new program teams, and adding mental health session as part of our flagship program as well. You'll see that many efforts are underway to ensure that we act with integrity and actually acknowledge the many lived realities of founders, because no one size fits all. One of the bigger things that we focused on, and this is a major shout out to our ops team, we went a step further to actually take a more complex and nuanced approach to focusing on the intersectionalities and inclusion in our portfolio. And really asking ourselves the question, are we really delivering on the premise to drive access to capital and diversity and outcome? So in this slide, you'll see that we are trying to work towards radical inclusion. Founders specifically were asked the level of agreement to 7 statements around fair treatment, integrating differences, decision-making, psychological safety, which is hugely important, trust, and 2 other markers. And together with one of our portfolio companies, Techspert AI, we decided to compare this data against the population. We added in an additional layer around intersectionality, which was through the use of Techspert AI, it actually allowed us to explore multiple diversity metrics at once. So we were able to see what the sentiments are from Asian men who identify as Asian, or what the sort of sentiments towards inclusion were from women who come from Black ethnic backgrounds as well. We are very pleased overall to say that our overall inclusion score is 4.4 out of 5. However, looking at those specific intersectionalities really allowed us to see that, for example, men from Asian or Asian British backgrounds felt less included than the average founder in the community. And Black African Caribbean or Black British women felt the least included with an average score of 3.3 out of 5. Now that we actually have this data and hard evidence, we are making several commitments to really address the most significant gaps that we've uncovered through this analysis as well. So stay tuned for more. And we really hope that we can ensure that founders from all walks of life feel welcome and included, and radically share the data of our portfolio companies for years to come. With this, we want to say thank you for joining us today. We have about 10 minutes left, so if there are any questions, and Paul, Millie, please join again. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yes, thanks, Dharma. It looks like we've got one question popped up in the chat, so maybe we can take that one first. And if anyone else wants to fire some as we're answering that one, do put them in the chat. Paul, I feel like this is a good one for you. Sounded like I was going to take it, but no.
Sure. So yeah, Julia asked a bit about this idea that in health and climate spaces, regulatory requirements might be helping to drive impact. I think we've kept our sort of engagement with the regulators and with the government at quite a general level, to be honest. And we've actually really tried to support portfolio companies to push on the issues that they think would help to change regulation or change policy so that it was easier to have a positive impact. So I think an example of that would be, in energy is the work that Piclo have done to try and make the UK electricity system more suitable for renewables. It was, archaic, to be brutally honest, and the regulation needed to change. And I think everybody knew that. But Piclo have done a really good job of playing a role in that to show what is possible in terms of flexibility in the grid. So that's one example where I think we probably do more to support portfolio companies to change the system and to change regulation than we do ourselves to try and lobby for particular regulatory changes.
Yeah, just to add to this as well, I think there are certain instances that have come out with sort of regulation coming out of Europe as well around sustainable finance disclosure regulations, so SFDR, which now stipulate that we just need to be more active in actually disclosing our sustainability activities when it comes to investments anyways. But on the flip side, there is potential need for us to sort of think about how we can lobby for more R&D credits in these particular sectors, because the early stage environment is notoriously bad in investing in these type of companies as well. So there's loads and loads of room to think about what might actually be helpful for startups in this sector. And there's, with the leveling up agenda, there are a few sort of efforts being taken now to actually increase R&D credits for sustainable companies, for example. But yeah, there's loads to think about, loads to do. And Julia, if you have any ideas you want to contribute as well, feel free to reach out to us.
So we've got another question through the Q&A, which is, do you ever worry that asking tech for good companies to provide their standards of evidence for their impact puts additional burden that wouldn't necessarily be there for non-impact investments? I think this is a really good question because, of course, like with the sort of reporting expectations comes an expectation from the companies to be collecting and managing that data. I think we would probably see it in a way that actually, because we're investing in companies where the impact is innate to their business model, that's also actually them figuring out whether their business is working. So actually, the closer that those two things are tied, I think we'd say like the less the burden is, because as we saw with Second Nature, they didn't pursue the kind of level of evidence because of like what because they wanted to prove their impact just for its own sake. They actually reached that level because they were having to do that to grow their business, to sell into the NHS. So I think we see it in that way. And another aspect, I suppose, is actually it's really important for other players in the industry to come together. So other impact investors to kind of come together where possible and to try and align the data that we're asking our companies for and the frameworks that we're using, because yeah, there are a number of frameworks out there, but I think we're slowly getting to a point where there's a consensus on which frameworks we should be using. Paul or Dharma, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think yeah, and it's very straightforward. Companies are doing that. Our companies particularly are doing this anyway because it benefits them. I think that is one thing we maybe we should look at in future impact reports, is like what benefits have our companies found from measuring their impact. I think we've got anecdotal evidence that it's been really helpful, but perhaps we should start to think about, can we show that because they have managed to measure their impact, it has had benefits to the company. Maybe that's something we should look at. Yeah.
And there's Yumi's also added to that answer in the chat if anyone's interested for a bit more context. Paul, do you want to take the other question that's coming?
Yeah, so Sasha asks, have you found being co-investors with VCs who are not impact focused, perhaps less diverse, or how have you found it? And has there been external pressures on founders to prioritize monetization over impact? So yeah, we find ourselves co-investing with non-impact investors quite often. I think you do see pressure, but because we're investing in companies where their impact is linked to their business model. So where the more of the product or service they sell, the better, from an impact perspective and obviously from a business perspective. It happens far less often than people might expect. So actually the pressure tends not to be around like sort of monetization over impact. It might be around like how how fast to grow using what model, but it's not the trade-off between impact and monetization that I think we find most often. It's more that there are different attitudes from different investors around your sort of route to growth, that sometimes I think that's where we see more differences potentially between co-investing with an impact investor and co-investing with a non-impact investor.
Great. Well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions. They were some really good questions, actually. So thank you for contributing. And I think that brings us to time, really, with 2 minutes to spare for you to grab a cup of tea before your next meeting, hopefully. So, yeah, I mean, all that is to say is thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining. If you haven't already downloaded the report, it's on our website. So do go and have a look. And yeah, thanks for joining and hope to see you soon.
Bye, everyone.